He had been standing on the roof for an hour, signaling me repeatedly. I was sitting in the courtyard with my mother-in-law. I didn't know how to make him understand that I couldn't come. I had gestured 3 or 4 times, signaling that I couldn't go and that he should stop these signals. If my mother-in-law saw, it would cause a problem, but it was as if he couldn't understand me. Finally, I turned my back to him. I knew this would make him very angry, and that later he would hold it against me, as he had done before. But I had no choice. I couldn't fulfill his wishes right now. If I did, I would get into a lot of trouble. His persistent signals in front of everyone put me in a difficult position. After a while, my mother-in-law lay down in the courtyard. Her loud snores echoed throughout the area. Seeing her asleep brought me a strange sense of relief. Now I could go meet my brother-in-law. I knew he would be upset, but what else could I do? If I left while she was awake, she would suspect something. Anyway, my mother-in-law was a worldly wise woman who kept a sharp eye on everything. Although we all lived under the same roof, there was a noticeable distance between my mother-in-law and my brother-in-law. One reason was that he wasn't her biological son, and very few people knew that. I quickly got up and started heading toward the roof where my brother-in-law was anxiously waiting for me. I knew how eager he must be. I had only climbed 3 or 4 steps when I heard the voice of my neighbor behind me. Hearing her voice, I felt a surge of irritation for the first time. Why did she have to come now? I thought to myself, but I put on a sweet face and inquired about her well-being. I glanced back at the roof, where my brother-in-law was standing, looking at me with a reproachful expression. I avoided meeting his gaze. I had tried my best, but it seemed our luck was not in our favor today. I spent quite a while chatting with my neighbor, and when she finally left, I returned to my room. When I checked my phone, I saw over 100 missed calls from my brother-in-law and several messages. I opened one of his messages. "You're not being fair to me." I sighed deeply and lay down on the bed. Sometimes I thought what I was doing was very wrong, but at other times, I felt compelled by my own desires. In the evening, my brother-in-law usually had his dinner in his room. I used to bring it to him, which gave us a chance to talk a little. That night, when I went to bring him his dinner, my mother-in-law stopped me. She took the food from my hands, saying she would deliver it herself. I was stunned. She had never shown such affection before. I silently cursed her under my breath. Both of us had already eaten by then, so I started gathering up the dishes. I had come to realize that even fate was not on our side now. Angrily, I returned to my room, only to find an empty room staring back at me. I had always hated being alone. I enjoyed being around people, chatting, laughing, but fate had played a cruel joke on me. My marriage brought me into a household with only a few people. One of them, my husband, spent 2 years abroad, returning home only for 2 months at a time. The first year of marriage was particularly tough because, after spending 2 months with me, my husband had left. In the second year, however, my brother-in-law had helped fill the void of my loneliness. Thinking of him brought a smile to my face. I fell asleep thinking about him. The next morning, I woke up quite late. As I hurried out of my room, the first thought that crossed my mind was my mother-in-law. She would always have her breakfast early and then take her medication. I stepped into the courtyard and saw her already, standing nearby. My brother-in-law was also there. I avoided his gaze, and he did the same. That's when I found out my mother-in-law was going to her sister's house for a few days. I was thrilled, imagining the freedom I'd have once she was gone. I could do whatever I wanted, spend as much time as I liked with my brother-in-law, and there'd be no one to stop us or keep an eye on us. But my happiness was short-lived. My mother-in-law quickly dashed my hopes by announcing that she was taking her son with her. I looked over at my brother-in-law in shock. His eyes reflected the same frustration and anger I felt, but he silently tried to reassure me, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'll figure something out." Still, my heart sank. A little later, my mother-in-law made another decision. She'd already informed my family, and my brother was coming to pick me up. Her habit of making decisions without consulting anyone was something I couldn't stand. My irritation kept growing, but I didn't know how to contain it. Before long, I found myself in my parents' home with my brother. I had assumed I'd spend only 2 days there and then return to my home, but that turned out to be wishful thinking. I ended up staying for a week, and I knew just how hard that week had been for me. All I wanted was to rush back home to be near my brother-in-law. But I was compelled to keep up appearances, showing everyone that I barely interacted with him and that we didn't get along. Only he and I knew the reality. After what felt like an eternity, I was back in my home, sitting with my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. He kept glancing at me with a restless expression, clearly asking me to come to his room. I kept avoiding his gaze. I couldn't fulfill his request just yet. Nearby, I noticed another person sitting in the courtyard. It was my mother-in-law's cousin, whom she had enthusiastically brought along. The distance between my brother-in-law and me seemed to be growing. One night, around midnight, I woke up feeling extremely thirsty. I reached out to grab water, but there was none nearby, so I had no choice but to leave my room. After drinking some water, in the kitchen, my thoughts drifted to my brother-in-law. I quickly stepped out into the courtyard and looked toward his room, where the light was still on. He was clearly awake. I glanced toward my mother-in-law's room, which was closed and silent. The whole house was still. No one else was awake. A sly smile spread across my face as my mind raced. It seemed like the perfect opportunity. I scolded myself for not thinking of this sooner. But now was as good a time as any. I quickly climbed the stairs and soon stood in front of my brother-in-law's door. I knocked, but even after some time, the door didn't open. I knocked a little louder this time, but before he could open the door, I heard my mother-in-law's friend's voice behind me. She was making her way upstairs, her voice filled with discomfort. Hearing her approach, I panicked. What was she doing here at this hour? I quickly moved to the other corner of the rooftop. To my surprise, I saw her knock on my brother-in-law's door. What could she possibly want from him at this hour? Shortly afterward, she went inside his room, and I seized the opportunity to hurry back downstairs. I waited in the lounge, curiosity gnawing at me. An hour passed, and I was still sitting there, now half asleep, but also stressed because of this woman. Eventually, I returned to my room and lay down. I soon fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, I woke up early and went straight to my mother-in-law's room to figure out what was going on. I was shocked to see that only she was in the room. There was no one else there. Could that woman have stayed upstairs all night? No, that couldn't be possible, I scolded myself. But my heart was restless, refusing to settle until I knew the truth. I paced around the courtyard like a cat on hot bricks, constantly glancing at the rooftop. The woman hadn't come down yet, and I was tempted to go upstairs and find out what was happening. But, as usual, I was helpless. To distract myself, I went to the kitchen and started making breakfast for everyone. Just as I finished, I saw her coming down the stairs. I carefully observed her face. She looked extremely pleased, as if she had just struck gold. Seeing her so happy made me furious. "What's wrong, Sarah? Why are you just standing there? Is breakfast ready?" she asked, noticing my fixed stare. "Yes, it's ready. What are you doing up there at this hour?" I finally asked her directly. "Oh, Sarah," she began. "I didn't go up there just now. I went up last night. Something quite unusual happened. Come, sit down, and I'll tell you all about it." Eagerly, she started recounting her story. I sat beside her, impatient to hear the truth. She explained that she had suddenly experienced a burning sensation in her stomach, which made it difficult to sleep. She went to my brother-in-law's room to ask him for medicine, since he had a medical background and always kept various medicines on hand. Whenever someone in the house felt unwell, they would reach out to him for help. At that moment, I felt a surge of shame in my own thoughts. I had been assuming all sorts of things. I realized now that when I first went to his door, he had actually been in the bathroom. I hadn't even bothered to check, simply assuming he was on the roof. And when I had seen her heading upstairs again from the kitchen, she had only gone to get the medicine. I was stunned and deeply angry at myself. How could I have been so petty in my thinking? We all sat together for breakfast that morning. My mother-in-law's friend mentioned that she would be leaving the next day. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law grew restless and exclaimed, "How can you leave so soon? You've only been here a few days." I thought to myself that it had been 2 weeks, not just a few days. My face showed obvious irritation, and my brother-in-law appeared equally fed up. Out of everyone, we were the most affected by her extended stay. My phone had also broken down recently, so I couldn't contact my brother-in-law through it. It felt like there was growing distance between us in just a few days, but I resolved to make time soon to bridge that gap. After breakfast, both women went back to their room, leaving only my brother-in-law and me in the courtyard. As I gathered the dishes, I heard his voice. "How much longer will you keep me waiting?" he said. "I can't bear it anymore. Please do something and end my suffering." I avoided his gaze. What could I tell him? I was struggling even more than he was, unable to manage anything. "I'll try tonight," I said. "I can't promise anything else. Whatever happens, it's in our fate." With that, I walked away and began making plans for the night. I considered the idea of meeting elsewhere away from the house. Surely it would be easier. I set an alarm for midnight. Quietly, I slipped out of my room. As I passed by my mother-in-law's room, I paused, waiting to see if anyone came out. But after some time, no one did. Still silent, I climbed the stairs to the rooftop. I had told my brother-in-law to open the door on the first knock. I knocked once, but there was no response. The silence around me was almost oppressive. I knocked again, and then a fourth time. Still no answer. I was growing increasingly angry. I had put myself in this difficult position to come to him, and now it felt like he was deliberately making me wait. I pushed the door slightly, and it opened. It hadn't been locked. I muttered a few curses under my breath and stepped inside. I felt an inexplicable sense of calm just being in his room again after so long. But then I realized the room was empty. Quickly, I checked the bathroom. No one there either. I was furious. This felt like a cruel joke. Without my phone, I couldn't even call him to find out where he had gone. I sank to the floor, consumed by frustration. I stayed like that for a long time, seething. Eventually, I managed to compose myself and went back downstairs. That entire night, I couldn't sleep. I promised myself that no matter what, I would never respond to him again. He had called me over only to humiliate me. The next 2 days passed without me seeing my brother-in-law around the house. I started to worry. Where had he disappeared to all of a sudden? When I mentioned this to my mother-in-law, she responded carelessly. Her indifference made me furious. Sure, he wasn't her biological son, but he had lived with her for so long. She should have shown some concern. Having spent so much time with someone, you at least develop a sense of belonging, if not love. But in this case, there was nothing of the sort. Sometimes I felt as if my mother-in-law's heart was made of stone, incapable of any kind of emotion. When I got my phone repaired by my brother, I found several messages from my brother-in-law. However, they were all old messages asking me to come to his room. Many of them were pleas, practically begging me. Reading them left me deeply upset. But what could I do? He knew I wasn't intentionally making things difficult for him. I was just helpless. A whole week passed. I tried talking to my mother-in-law again, but this time, instead of understanding, she scolded me. Why are you so concerned about him all of a sudden? He'll come back when he feels like it. Stop worrying about him and pay attention to your husband. He's returning soon, she said. Hearing that, I was stunned. My husband was coming back. My thoughts suddenly shifted to him. It had been a long time since we had spoken. We had had an argument months ago, and since then, I had stopped calling him. He, too, never reached out after that. We were both holding on to our pride. In the meantime, I had been so preoccupied with my brother-in-law's absence that I barely thought about my husband. But now that she had mentioned him, I began to worry. I quickly grabbed my phone and tried calling him, but no one picked up. He was likely at work. I decided to call him again in the evening. During this time, I also kept trying to contact my brother-in-law, but his phone was still off. It felt like these two brothers were driving me insane. I buried my head in my hands, feeling utterly helpless. That night, I finally spoke to my husband. He explained that he was returning after only 6 months because his company had encountered some issues and was temporarily shutting down. He sounded quite stressed. I reassured him, telling him not to worry and that everything would be fine once he came back. The next 2 days passed as usual. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the kitchen cutting vegetables, my mother-in-law walked in, holding my phone. Keep your phone by your side, she said. I was asleep, but the ringtone woke me up. Someone keeps calling you nonstop. Pick it up and ask what's going on. With that, she returned to her room. I looked at the phone and saw several missed calls from an unknown number. Just as I was about to put it down, another call came in. When I answered, I heard my brother-in-law's voice. A wave of relief washed over me. He had no idea how worried I had been about him. After asking about his well-being, I started to inquire where he had been, but he interrupted me. "Get to my apartment right now," he said urgently. "I can't wait any longer. If you don't come, I'll do something drastic." Hearing this, I became alarmed. I hadn't expected this from him at all. I told him to be patient, but he kept repeating that he couldn't wait any longer. So I told my mother-in-law that I was going to a friend's house, then stepped out of the house. My entire body trembled with fear. Gathering my courage, I gave the address to the rickshaw driver. After a short ride, I found myself standing in front of my brother-in-law's apartment door. On the first ring of the doorbell, he opened the door, smiling as he looked at me. He stepped aside, and I walked in. There, sitting inside, was my friend. I had called her earlier to come to his apartment. I wished they would wait a little longer, given that their parents still weren't on board, but they had ignored my advice. Today was the day they planned to get married. My brother-in-law had been urging me to meet him in his room, and one day, he even brought Noor to our house. That made him even more anxious because he didn't know how to send her back. He needed my help, but I was already helpless because of my mother-in-law. Thankfully, Noor managed to leave the house safely that day. Not long after I arrived, their marriage was quietly and smoothly solemnized. I wish my husband could have been there. "You didn't even bother waiting for my husband," I complained to my brother-in-law. He laughed and said, "I waited as long as I could. It's not my fault he didn't come back today. During the past 6 months, while my husband was away, I had been trying to set up my brother-in-law and my friend. Today, I finally succeeded. The one thing he had been insisting on for 6 months was now done. As for convincing my mother-in-law, I left that entirely to my brother-in-law. I couldn't do anything more for him. I wished them both a happy life together and left the apartment.